on Rumble and YouTube. I'm here again with Richard Weiss, and today we're having just an open discussion on the abortion topic. So, you can
Well,
start if you want.
since there was just recently an assassination attempt, maybe we can't not mention that.
Right, yeah, that is very big news. Um,
Uh, I was wondering what you thought about that and if they identified any motive, and I don't know if I have the most up-to-date information.
I haven't heard about a motive yet. I forget what his name was, but I heard the FBI released the name and someone's face to go along with it. I,
hmm
I heard that he died at the scene.
Yeah, and I happened to be in Butler at the time, but I
Wow.
didn't go to the Trump rally, but
Yeah.
I was visiting my dad. He lives in a retirement community in Butler. So that was not too far away.
Yeah, that's close to home.
I think that's going to increase, sympathy and support for Trump.
I think it will.
I do have some questions about it, though. Um, from the picture I saw, the angle of where the shooter was and Trump, it didn't look like it would make those types of wounds. I would like to see an explanation of that. And then he didn't seem to be too, in a rush to leave. They took him off the stage slowly. I thought that was very odd.
Hmm. I haven't looked too
When he
far
was,
into that.
there was something else. He was indoors and something happened. I don't remember what, but they rushed him off the stage and out of the room, and they moved pretty quick that time because they were concerned about some kind of threat. I don't remember what it was.
Hmm.
This one, they seemed to move real slow, and they let him take pictures, pumping his fist, and I was like, something looks odd, because I would definitely think they would really move him off fast. But those are just some questions I have, but hopefully they'll have some explanation.
Hmm.
If you're not interested in continuing any more in that, I'm ready to talk about abortion if you like. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. I directed you to look at my little write up to the questionnaire and iVoter guide.
I did see that. Do you want to summarize it for everyone?
Well, it is a little bit involved, but the basic idea is that most people who oppose abortion have a religious reason for it. So I developed my religious response. And what has been historically in the church, they've viewed that when the fetus becomes animated, moves, is when it develops or receives this soul or rational soul, I think, as Thomas Aquinas called it. And so it was possible to have an abortion before this time of animating. And this term for that was a quickening. And that's from an old use of the word quick. The word quick also means alive, um, although it's not used that way anymore. But the quickening is like when the fetus becomes animated, starts to move. And that happens sometime, usually between 17 and 22 weeks. So I link that to Genesis, where the body of Adam is formed from dust, and then God breathes life into the body that he formed. And so before that breath enters, it's not really a person yet. And my position is that before the body is formed, it's not yet a human being. And then when the soul enters is when the fetus becomes animated. And so I do agree with allowing abortion up to a certain point. I understand people could differ as to when that point is. My latest point is up to 22 weeks, or rather the end of the 21st week. Then I would agree with some restrictions, but not 100%. Um, would still be possible for an abortion if it is clear that the fetus is not alive or is developing without a head, something that's, a fatal flaw. Um, if it's a, or if it's a threat to the life of the mother, it would still be possible. But I really don't think many people, I'm not sure any, are seeking an abortion of a healthy fetus after 22 weeks anyway. So I don't have a problem with having, or after 21 weeks. Um, I don't see a problem with having some kind of restriction. I would still have exceptions for the threat to the life of the mother and to serious defects. I mentioned that I would not count autism or um, some other things that people might call defects. I wouldn't accept that as a reason. They would have to be severe. And the clearest cases, there are some fetuses that are developing without a head, without a brain. It's never going to be a person. Um, what else? I wouldn't call it murder, even if there was an abortion in the 22nd week, meaning it would be after the end of the 21st week, which I would allow. I wouldn't call it murder. I would say the doctor's license, he might not be allowed to perform abortions. He might have his license suspended temporarily, could be disciplined in some way. But it is true, though, that the closer you get to 9 months, the more closer to being a person that the fetus becomes. So the penalty could increase over time. So that's my general view.
Hmm. Yeah, I gotta say, that's the first time I've heard someone interpret that Genesis passage in that way and link Thomas Aquinas to it as well. So that was interesting. I appreciate how well thought out that was.
There is also a mention of abortion in the Bible. Uh, did you see that? I think that's also in there.
Remind me which
Uh,
passage that was.
that was Numbers, and I think it's 5:15. It might be 25. I remember there was fives in there, but in that passage, a husband who suspected his wife of infidelity could require her to drink an abortifacient.
Now that's interesting.
Yes, and then it said the if the birth was not terminated, it meant it was his.
Hmm. That is
So
interesting. It's sort of like
I,
putting it in God's hands to decide the fate of the child.
so I interpret that. I understand people disagree. I interpret that to mean that abortion was something practiced in the ancient world, and it was practiced all through history up through the United States. Even Benjamin Franklin, he published some kind of handy manual for people living out, far from hospitals and having to take care of themselves out on the land. And this manual included a recipe for an abortifacient. And I don't think these available recipes that could be made from natural substances, I don't think they would work after 21 weeks anyway. It would only be very early in the pregnancy.
Hmm. Well, certainly different plants do different things. I imagine they would have different effects depending on how developed it is.
There was something else. Oh, somebody mentioned a passage from the Bible where um, John the Baptist was still, a fetus in the womb, and when the mothers met Mary and now I forget the name, but John the Baptist as a fetus leapt for joy.
Huh.
for and that, but that, if you look at the timeline, that would have been like 6 months, I think it says, or some or more, into the pregnancy when that happened, and it would have been after the quickening, and the movement alone indicates the quickening, and so it would not be permissible to have an abortion, uh, under the rule I propose.
Hmm. You certainly did your homework with this. Yeah.
It developed over, you know, over a period of time.
Well, I guess my opinion is pretty complex. Oh, it's a complex issue, but my opinion's pretty complex, a little bit multifaceted. I I draw a distinction between what I want government to do and what I want the people and the culture to do. Because
Mhm.
I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to what I think government should do. In the perfect world, I don't think government should have their hand in it, but I recognize so many people want some sort of law about this, and no matter what the law is, it's impossible to make everyone happy. But I think having some sort of cutoff, whether it be first trimester or heartbeat or the proposal you give, some sort of cutoff is probably a healthy medium for keeping people from being up in arms. That's in terms of what I think the law should be. But what I think culture should do, I think that the harms of this, the harms of doing this socially, mentally, are not well enough acknowledged, are not talked about enough. I think that the mental health effect of a woman having a miscarriage, whether it's intentional or not, that can be pretty severe and in some cases life changing. I've known friends and neighbors who have lost babies, and I've at least heard about people who have regretted having abortions. And maybe I've read, maybe I've been reading too much Dostoevsky, but I think the guilt plays a big effect in that. And to some extent, I think that drawing a distinction when someone's laying awake at night, it doesn't really matter how many weeks along the baby was. If someone's feeling guilty about it, then a rationalization like that isn't going to help in that situation. I sort of relate that back to Romans 7 and also to Sermon on the Mount. It's about all the loopholes we can make, all the little nitpicking about super specific items of the law when Jesus came along and said, this is right or wrong because it just is. Like, you can debate all day what kind of divorce is acceptable, but if you're splitting up God made man and woman one flesh, but if you try to separate that, then it's a violation of the perfect world that God wants for us. And it's the same thing for a child that was supposed to be but died. So that's my religious
Um,
view on it.
the people who have regret, I would say, is a small number, and there can be some kind of counseling before and after, so that the person understands what they're doing. Um, but are you saying you also don't agree that there should be divorce?
Well, in a perfect world, no, I don't think there should be divorce. The
Yeah,
my
I
pastor
mean,
actually just talked
suppose.
about this today. The two exceptions are sexual infidelity and abandonment, which some people expand abandonment to mean to also include abusive situations. And outside of that, like throwing away a whole marriage just because you're going through a rough patch and arguing a lot, that's something that I'm speaking from experience here. That's something that you should seek counseling, apologize as many times as it takes, sit down and go through tough conversations as many times as it takes every day for a month if you need to. It's something you just got to work through because having a person that you dedicate your life to and not breaking that promise that you made to them, that's worth it.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. It's not a perfect world, though. Um, and when people apply for a divorce, it's normal unless they both agree. If either one disagrees with the divorce, the court will usually give them. It will take 2 years in order to grant a divorce, so they have quite a long time to reconcile, and that's intentional for the purpose of allowing a reconciliation.
Yeah, well, I hope that anyone going through that is able to get reconciled for themselves, for the kids, for the baggage that they might be bringing into future relationships. It's a messy situation, and I hope for a
Sometimes
minimization of harm from that.
Sometimes the spouse, usually the husband, but sometimes the wife too. Sometimes the spouse is not good for the kids, and you need to get away from that spouse. It can be abusive, things like that. Um, so, my response is, from the religious perspective, is that some people are not what God intended to be together. So it's not necessarily going through the ceremony marries them in God's eyes, because that may not have been what He intended. So they were actually forcing the marriage against God's will. And these are marriages that should be dissolved. And within the Catholic Church, they don't allow divorce, but they do allow annulment. And it almost works like divorce. If you can find a priest who is sympathetic and agrees that these people shouldn't be together and writes it up in the correct way and submits it to the Vatican, they can get an annulment. And that would mean that the marriage was void from the very beginning, as if there were no marriage from the start. That's just the way they term it.
Mm. I know that those exist. I think that a lot of other options need to be gone through before that's considered because of all the fallout that comes down on family members, on future partners, on everyone else. The idea is to, if you can, keep the fallout just between the two spouses and ideally find a way for them to work it out and make things better.
Certainly, and definitely, like I mentioned, even if you go to court, if either of the spouses disagree, it can take 2 years to get to divorce. So there's ample opportunity to go through all sorts of counseling and reconciliation. And then I think getting an annulment through the Catholic Church is even more difficult. It's going to take a while. So there's time for some kind of reconciliation.
Certainly, yeah.
So when it comes to abortion, I understand you have a libertarian kind of perspective. Um, I also, in general, think it's basically a decision between the mother and her doctor, and I believe they normally come to a good decision on that, and that this is just being whipped up for political reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. If the doctor says there's some medical risk involved, then that's got to be a discussion that happens between the family, and they're the ones that should be making that decision.
Well, the clearer cases are things like an ectopic pregnancy. It's not possible to carry to term, and it's life threatening to the mother.
Right.
So definitely that should be terminated as quickly as possible. And the way things are right now, they have to wait until it's life-threatening. And that's quite dangerous because they could die before it gets taken care of.
Hmm.
That's a clear case. But I also, because I believe that the body being formed is not yet a human being, I don't have a problem with a no questions asked prompt and safe abortion. And I personally would go up to 21 weeks at the most. And I understand that some people would go a little earlier than that.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different factors to it. One of the exceptions that people often talk about is if the baby has some birth defect or some genetic defect. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that depends on how severe. And the clearest case is where they're developing without a brain and encephaly, without a brain, without a head sometimes. And it's clear that's never going to be a person. And they should be allowed to terminate as quickly as possible. The way it is now, they're forcing some mothers to carry that and have a stillborn birth, and that also is threatening the health of the mother to do that. And then why would they want to carry, something that they know is not alive? It's not going to live. Um, I think that's a little bit traumatic to force them to carry that. I understand there's lots of area in between the very clear examples. I personally would not consider Down syndrome to be a severe defect. They that's not a reason for an abortion after 21 weeks.
Right. Yeah, I agree. If the the baby in question is not going to be able to live outside, well, like you said, not viable, then it doesn't make sense to keep it. But also, I agree with you on Down syndrome. It's a tough decision knowing how much assistance, how much extra effort that baby is going to need throughout their life. But at the end of the day, it's a person.
Um, if it's something early, what the Roe v. Wade court said, the first trimester, if it's only been a few weeks, I'm not going to inquire because I don't believe that's yet a human being.
Hmm. Well, I guess I would go back to that guilt thing on that because someone choosing to go through with it, they know that it has the potential to be a human being, and had they not gone down that route, it likely would have been.
Um, I don't know how apt of an analogy it is, but I've heard some people compare it to birth control. You know, there would be a baby without birth control. You also oppose birth control. Um, I'm just willing to say I don't think this is yet a person. Even after 21 weeks, it's not yet a person, but I would not um, advise an abortion. I would say that's not advisable if it's a healthy fetus. There's exceptions of severe defects or completely non-viable threat to the life of the mother. But after 21 weeks is when I would say that is too close to being a person to terminate for no reason.
Right, for sure.
And then that is after what they call quickening. The fetus is already animated; it's moving.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different angles to go through. I'm thinking of the other common exceptions that people talk about, rape and incest. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Um, if it's after 21 weeks, I still would say that's too close to being a person. So I think that there is an opportunity prior to the end of 21 weeks. to have that abortion. And then that would be no questions asked.
Hmm. I meant the other exceptions that people often give uh, to a pro-life position are if the baby is a product of rape or if it's a product of incest.
Yeah, that it's a difficult question, but I would say um, still following the same rule up to 21 weeks, no questions. After 21 weeks, rape and incest isn't a reason to terminate a healthy fetus.
I definitely have sympathy with people who are in that position of having to face either knowing their child came from someone who assaulted them or knowing their child is going to grow up with a confusing family situation and potentially also birth defects. But I would say that if at all possible, respect the life of the child.
And yes, and that's where I agree after the 21 weeks. Some people might say 20 or 19. Um, I just wouldn't really inquire into the reason prior to the end of 21 weeks, um, other than to give the counseling, like you say, to make sure they know what they're doing. This is really what you want to do. Um, but yes, that's still after the 21 weeks. It's a fetus that is healthy and is animated, is moving. Then um, there are some rights of the fetus at that point, and then you couldn't just terminate that. So I would agree with placing a restriction on any healthy fetus being aborted after 21 weeks. And rape and incest wouldn't cancel that. The fetus, of course, and I'm deliberately avoiding the word baby. Baby's supposed to be after birth. Um, so while still in the womb, it's a fetus. Um, it's not their fault, you know, the circumstances of how they were conceived. So that shouldn't be held against them.
Right. Yeah, I've been using the word baby for simplicity because I know that at different stages it's called something different, zygote, fetus. I haven't memorized the time cutoffs for those names yet, so for simplicity I'll just call it
Neither have
baby.
I.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh, Later in the pregnancy, it is a fetus.
Right.
Um, and so if it's terminated after 21 weeks, that would be a fetus. And I agree with placing restrictions after 21 weeks. Has to be a severe defect. The only obvious case is anencephaly. There's no brain. It's never going to be a person. Um, and then there's of course a range of different kinds of defects, and how much is too severe is a question. I understand. I would not count Down syndrome as severe enough. There's been plenty of people with Down syndrome who have lived fulfilling lives. Um, so I wouldn't count that as a severe defect. I wouldn't count autism if they could detect it in a fetus. Um, it would have to be something that really meant that the person couldn't function, uh, would never have a real fulfilling life.
Yeah, that's various defects are something I find interesting to think about. I talked about it a little in the last book review I did, The Fall of Western Man, and it's interesting because I see how many people need wisdom teeth out, how many people need glasses, how many people need appendicitis surgery. For example, I was a C-section and also I had to get appendicitis, so already twice over, if it weren't for modern medicine, I would not have made it to adulthood. So it's interesting to think about how avoiding natural selection and using medical advances like that is could in the future over time make humans a lot more dependent on medical technology And I suppose I have a knee jerk reaction of wanting to resist that dependence, but at the same time, it's important to recognize that every one of these babies is human.
Definitely. I don't consider use of modern medicine to in any way detract from the humanity of the people who benefit from it. Sometimes the miracle comes in the form of medicine, of modern medicine.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Here's an interesting angle on it. Do you think that either the father or the parents of the mother, that is, should have any legal say, legal ability to prevent an abortion?
The parents, well, it depends on whether it's a minor. I mean, if the person's already 18, certainly um, the person who's pregnant can decide. Under 18, I think parents may have some voice, but I don't think they could make the decision for the pregnant person.
What about the father of the child?
I think the father of the child could have some voice as well, but I don't think they can prevent the a choice of an abortion before 21 weeks. And after 21 weeks, there would be restrictions that would apply whether or not the father agreed.
It's just an interesting angle that I don't see talked about a lot, but I remember back when I was really young, when I first heard about this as a thing that could be debated, one of my first thoughts was if a child of mine ever gets aborted, I would really be unhappy with that. I would really want my child to be able to live.
Yes, that does depend on whether you view this as a child. Like I was saying, at an early point in the pregnancy, it's not yet a human being.
So, earlier on, when we first got into this topic, we briefly touched on the topic of divorce and coming off of whether or not the father should have any say of this. Are you familiar with the men's rights movement?
Well, I've heard some things, but I'm not an expert on that. You can ask a question or give a summary of a position.
I haven't looked into it recently. I'm just thinking of it because we're touching on topics related to it. The people who think it's unfair that divorce courts so heavily favor the wife over the husband, and on, things like that. Men getting more time in prison for the same crime, stuff like that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, Not always, but usually small children do better with the mother. Um, I think the courts are more and more trying to be equally balanced between the father and the mother. As the children get older, certainly it's not um, necessary to prefer one over the other without some reason. I mean, if the one of the parents was abusive, that might be a reason to limit the amount of time or have it be supervised or something like that. Yes, I've known a few people who've been divorced, and I know one in particular who really fought, and I think he is a good father, and I'm really glad he fought and he got equal time with his children, um, and he really felt like he was discriminated against, and that's why he had to fight so hard, and it was expensive legally, but he did get the equal time. Um, so I'm very glad he did because I think the kids did better with him when they were with him. Uh, So yeah, he feels very much that men are discriminated against in those circumstances. I think the movement is to be more equal between the two and to rely on um, some kind of expert testimony as to if one was abusive in some way, that could be a reason, and that is not based on gender, but the actions of that parent.
Yeah, every situation is different. Every couple is different. It
Mhm.
reminds me of that Tolstoy book, Anna Karenina. All happy couples are essentially the same, but all unhappy couples are each unhappy in their own special way.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. It's a nice quote, but I'm sure that the happy couples are also happy in their own special way. I think so.
But yeah, I would say the mother is usually more important than the father for a child's upbringing. And I would also say that the father has some amount of responsibility for the well being of both the mother and the child, even if it
Uh,
means making personal sacrifices.
I think both are very important. So, if there is a father who wants to be a part of his children's lives, I think that's a very good thing. Um,
Definitely.
the very small children up to 5 years, 5 years and less, um, usually do better with the mother. That it just depends on, how much of, the Mr. Mom, how much is the dad willing to mother the children. Uh, and certainly some are able to do it. I don't know yet if it's become something in general, like a majority. So I understand there may be a preference for the mother for the small children.
Yeah. And I've known exceptions in the other way too. I know single father essentially keeps a clean house, makes six figures, A+ in basically every way, works, has a good home life for the kids, and I don't know how he does it honestly, but of course there's exceptions both ways, and
I agree,
yeah,
definitely. Yes, there are. There's also, mothers who are not really good for their children. It happens.
what about
Certainly, I think for the teens, I mean, I think the entire time the father should be involved. But for when especially when they get to be teenagers, I think the father gives a more, um, I don't know, advice in life and is more the one who's the disciplinarian. The mother's supposed to be the one who's always nurturing and caring, and it's the father is the one who has to say, well, here's the hard, tough facts you got to deal with, you know,
right?
stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, they different but complementary roles in that child's upbringing.
Yes.
What about
Okay.
the
Mhm.
differential in prison sentencing? Do you have thoughts there?
Oh, well, that doesn't sound fair if there's a difference in gender. It's clear in sentencing and the prison population, it's definitely unfair in general for the entire population. It is disproportionately minorities. It is disproportionately the poor. If you look at like the rate of the kids of wealthy families and poor families, they're using marijuana at the same rate. But how many get put in jail for marijuana charges? It's almost all poor. There's no wealthy kids, children of wealthy families in prison for these charges because they can afford the best legal representation and all sorts of expensive things that make it difficult to imprison them and so they go after the easy prey, the people who can't defend themselves. So we need to change that in all sorts of ways. Yes, um, men should not be penalized more than women for the same crime in general. I'd have to hear what would be a reason for that. I can't think of any offhand. Um,
I think we agree that marijuana should be decriminalized, but more to the point, um, I could sort of see it both ways. On the one hand, it certainly is unfair, but on the other hand, one could argue that, especially in domestic violence cases, men can be more dangerous being out free.
oh well, you see that then that's not necessarily equal. Um, if the guy is punching a woman, he can really hurt her, whereas if she slaps him, she can't really kill him. I mean, just harm his ego. Maybe
Right.
it's not. It's not going to really hurt him. Yeah, I had someone mention a girl was unhappy with their relationship and slapped him, and he felt like that was abuse. And but she's not going to like threaten his life or anything.
Right.
He can walk away without really feeling endangered, whereas she may not be able to.
Yeah. There's lots of tough situations out there. Um,
Definitely, marijuana should be decriminalized. I don't see any reason for keeping people in jail for marijuana charges.
yes,
I can understand driving while intoxicated, so that could apply to any kind of intoxicant, which could
absolutely.
include
Yeah.
marijuana.
The laws
Yeah,
that we currently have for DUIs, there's no reason that they can't also cover marijuana as well as alcohol.
it's any intoxicant. It's not like specific to marijuana.
Right. The police are
So
already
yeah.
equipped to handle it.
Hmm. Yeah, sometimes people, when they say, legalize it, they want marijuana to be as legal as tobacco, and I don't think it would be that legal because you could smoke a cigarette and drive, but you couldn't smoke marijuana and drive, in my opinion.
True, that's a good point.
So it'd be more like alcohol.
Right.
Uh, and then there was, I forget who, Rand Paul or somebody in Congress said, oh, if we legalize marijuana, they can't uh, stop people because they smell marijuana anymore. And I'm like, well, if you smell alcohol, you can stop people. If you smell marijuana in the driver, yeah, you can, just like if you smell alcohol.
Right.
But that being said, I would like to also limit traffic stops. There's too many pretextual traffic stops where there's not really a reason, but they just want to search someone's car or check someone out. And I would say, if they're not endangering anyone, if they're, speeding, they could stop someone, driving erratically, they could stop someone. But if it's just like a broken tail light, just take a picture and mail them a ticket. Don't stop them.
That would be quicker. Yeah.
Because there's people end up dead after these stops. So and for no reason. So well, I think we should definitely cut back on traffic stops.
Yeah, every situation's different there, and I can certainly sympathize that both that it's scary to get pulled over because I've been pulled over myself, but also that the officer doesn't know what they're getting into. They don't know if the person inside the car is gonna pull out a gun and start shooting. I've seen
Uh,
I've seen dash cam videos of things similar to that.
it's dangerous for both the officer
Yeah,
and the drivers, and I mean innocent drivers. Um, So that's why I say cut down on that. I think the policing, we do need some kind of change in the police procedures and tactics. Uh, and I think if we change the focus, what's the goal? The goal should be there's no fatalities, neither officers nor members of the public, whether they're guilty or not. There should be no fatalities. Any fatality should be regarded as some kind of failure that we need to overcome. We need some kind of way of designing it out of the system. So you wouldn't have, a lone officer confronting a lone driver. That there would be some way of uh, protecting the officers and the public, and
Hmm.
they would have more non-lethal means of taking people in, so that if someone has a knife, it's not necessary to shoot them. They'll have something that they could use to take them down and immobilize them without having to shoot them. And I think we can work this out.
That's an interesting way to put it, designing it out of the system, because I know people who would say that if someone is the type of person who would pull out a gun or a knife because they've been pulled over by a traffic cop, then if they would do that, then it's only a matter of time until they do something violent somewhere that gets someone hurt or puts them in jail. But on the other hand, it's obviously a good idea to try and avoid violence when we can.
I definitely shooting for the non-violent or reduction in violence, or at least the reduction in fatalities. Um, we can't, shoot people for crimes they might commit in the future. They haven't committed them yet,
Right.
and we have a court process. So there was someone I was talking to online, and I don't recall if they were themselves in the military or something like that. But I made some kind of analogy. So imagine your special forces, and you have a mission to take this particular individual alive, and they're needed alive for some reason. And if that was your mission and you have a team, and they pull out a knife on you, you're not going to just suddenly kill them, because your mission is to take them alive. You're going to take them alive. You're going to find a way to do it. And I think we can. And we can do that with policing too.
Yeah, that is. I'd say that is a good analogy because both of those roles, there's more so military, but certainly both of those roles, there's an understanding that there is risk of life involved in certain situations. It's sad that it has to be, but it has to be for us to have an orderly system of everybody living life.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't want to start attacking people for crimes they might possibly commit in the future. If someone's driving in a way that's not threatening, and they commit some violation, then I would say it's not enough to stop them, because it's a threat to both the driver and the officer. Take a picture, send them a ticket. If he gets too many, he can be ordered into court to appear, and then there can be an arrest if he doesn't show up.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I'm planning to talk about in the coming weeks actually is the. You're from a different part of the state. I'm not sure if you've heard or not about the breakouts, the prison breakouts in southeast Pennsylvania. We had two last fall around the same time, and then this past week we had one more from a juvenile detention facility that's actually pretty close to me. So I'm going to
Hmm.
be talking about that on my channel. pretty soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I haven't heard about that. So what happened? Did they hurt anyone?
Um, Not that I'm aware of. The one last year, there was one in Chester County. The one guy, his name is Danilo Cavalcante. He is actually a Brazilian illegal immigrant in prison for murder. He escaped, and I think it was a 10-day or a 13-day manhunt for the guy, but they got him, no loss of life. They got him back in. But at the same time he got out, there was a riot in this same juvenile detention where 9 people got out, and then just this past week, another 2 got out, but they got those 2.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, there is there's a broader societal reason for crime, and it's not a quick fix, but all over the world in societies where there is less of a distinction, a division of wealth, uh, a less of a divide, where you have greater division of wealth. So there's the difference between the very poor and the very rich is very far, and there's not many people in between. You have higher crime. And in societies where it's closer, the poorest and the most rich are closer in range, there's less crime. So I think we can work towards that. Um, right now in the U.S., slavery is legal. It is legal under the 13th Amendment as a punishment for crime. So there are many industries in the U.S. that are dependent on prison labor, where they're paid, cents per hour. Uh, if we required that anyone using prison labor had to pay the minimum wage, if we eliminated slavery, I think we would have a much lower prison population, because having people in prison is profitable for somebody. They're making money off of it, and they're charging us, the taxpayers, for the incarceration, which is quite expensive. It's like tens of thousands of dollars per person per year. And the U.S. has the highest prison population as a percentage of the population in the world among the developed countries. Probably the entire world, because the poorer countries don't have enough money for so many prisons like we do. Um, Something like 1% of the population is in jail or prison at some point on any given day in the United States, which is incredibly high. So we usually, say, "Oh, that's something they do in China. They have prison labor." We have it right here, and there are many industries that are dependent on it. So when they point to immigrants and say immigrants are taking the jobs, it's really prison labor is taking the jobs. They're getting paid sub-minimum wage, cents per hour, not minimum wage. Even minimum wage is not very much anymore these days, but they're getting paid much less than that. So I don't think it's the immigrants that's the problem for taking jobs. I think it's the slavery, and we should end it. And then the prison population will go down. And then we could reduce crime if we can find a way to invest in our communities so that people have minimum basic, not luxurious, just basic food, clothing, shelter, education, jobs. And I bet it's a good crime rate will plummet.
I I've heard before about the wealth disparity causing crime. I'm not sure that's the defining factor though. And I've also I mean, being familiar enough with Solzhenitsyn's writing, I would have a pretty strong knee-jerk reaction against that because I've seen what comes of people attempting to cure the wealth disparity and putting that goal above all else. Um, Also, you mentioned I I suppose I don't have strong thoughts one way or the other with regards to paying minimum wage for prison labor because on the one hand, they did a crime, they're in prison, they might as well do something productive with their time. I know a lot of people that read books, get certified in some trade, better themselves in some way, exercise, but there's also people that don't have enough to do and need more to do. I don't really see a problem with having them do something productive while they're in there.
Oh, definitely they should learn skills. They just simply they should be paid. So out in California, the firefighters from the prisons are getting $1 an hour, and they're fighting the fires. And then when they get out of prison, they don't qualify to become a firefighter because they have a prison record. I think it's very unfair.
Oh, ain't that a kick in the head?
And then they said that when Kamala was the Attorney General of California, it wasn't her personally, but one of the prosecutors working under her made the argument that if they let too many people out of jail, they would not have enough money because they need those people to work
Yeah, that's
at
another
some
thing.
minimum wage.
I think that once a person's time is up, they should be completely all rights restored. No no record essentially once they serve their time and they're freed.
I think so, and I think they should be allowed to vote.
I believe they are allowed to vote once they're free.
Well,
Not while they're in there. Felons not while they're
it's
currently serving time, but once they're out, they are
it's
allowed to vote again.
it's a little bit different in different states, and actually, I'm not sure what the rule is in Pennsylvania, but some states say uh, even past felons can't vote again.
As far as I know, in Pennsylvania, it's allowed, and I know this because Scott Pressler had a week or two where he was going around different prisons and registering a bunch of people to vote.
Hmm.
Another thing, this might be sort of a wacko opinion out of left field, but going back to the phrase cruel and unusual punishment in the Bill of Rights, I think that forcing someone to spend decades of their life behind bars, depriving them of a normal life, family, all those things that normal people do with their lives, I think that is more cruel and unusual than 30 lashes or 50 lashes like the British or the Romans used to do.
Well, there was a case in Singapore, and these were kids. They might have been, you know, expatriate kids. Their parents are working in Singapore. They come from another country, like the U.S. or somewhere in Europe. I can't remember where they were from. And the kids keyed some cars. They took a key or something and scratched the cars, and they were caught. And they're given lashes with a cane. There's caning, like an old British punishment, and some people felt that was justified. Uh, I'm not sure what's the best thing, but I do believe that if they had to pay the actual value of the labor, we would have a lot less incarceration. I think people are being too easily rounded up and herded into prisons, and we're building prisons at breakneck speed right now. So I feel a lot of those convictions are unjustified, and the way we can cut them down is by removing the profit incentive. If incarceration is no longer profitable, it will go down.
Yeah, with the case you mentioned about keying those cars, I would rather caning than having them spend years behind bars, and especially when they're that young, they have that many steps in transitioning out of adolescence to go. Spending that time in particular behind bars would be it wouldn't do anything good for the rest of their lives. That's for certain.
That might be the view of the Singaporeans. That's like, why should we pay, tens of thousands of dollars to incarcerate them? It's a cost to us when we could just, I can't remember how many times it was, 20 lashes with the cane, something like that. Um, some people, I don't have a, well-developed response on that myself. I hadn't thought exactly what I think is best, but I do recall that some people felt it was appropriate.
I also know that Singapore has a sort of hefty death penalty too. I hear that they give that out more often than most countries.
I'd have to look up how often that actually happens, but that's definitely the idea is to deter drug trafficking. So when you go through the airport, they'll have some sign saying death to drug traffickers, things
Right.
like that. Um, even with the drugs, it's always the kingpin has the money to pay off people. It's the little people who get caught and suffer the penalties,
Yeah, of course. The people who can afford lawyers are the ones that are gonna get off better from that always.
or can afford to pay off the right officials and things like that.
Right. Oh, yeah, of course.
So yes, I'm against the death penalty in general for anything.
I think there are times where it's warranted. Not often, but there certainly are times.
There certainly are some heinous crimes. However, it, there's too often the case where they can't necessarily solve a crime, so they pin it on someone to make it look like they've done their job, and this person may or may not be guilty.
Right.
And there's many that have been reversed, and there's ones who might be just recently and probably might have already been executed. I don't know, but it was definitely called into question. And I think there was a case, it was a Supreme Court case where they're like, oh, we need certainty. We can't, even if we have evidence exonerating, I don't think that's a valid argument to say, oh, we need certainty, so we're going to execute them when we have evidence that they weren't guilty. I don't think that's a valid decision.
Yeah, well, having studied psychology, I've seen cases where witness unreliability is illustrated, that people can't necessarily pick out the guy who did it out of a lineup, even if they think they can.
There's cases where they have evidence that indicates someone else, but they want to continue with the same person because they already got him and they want the credit for solving the crime. So
Yeah,
they're
that's
like
another thing.
withholding.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
they want that good
Uh,
record.
so, before there was genetic testing, that happened even more often. And now with the testing, it's exonerating some people.
Yeah,
So
good
I
for
think
them.
that the death penalty is just too dangerous that somebody who is actually innocent could be executed. I understand once in a while you definitely know this is the person. He definitely did something extremely heinous. And I would rather not have the death penalty than to have it and then have it used against the wrong person sometime in the future. So even the person who's done the worst thing ever, they just spend the rest of their life in prison. That's all.
Transitioning to a different topic, have you heard about the state budget that passed recently?
I am not well read up on it at the moment, but let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'm not as well read as I could be on it. I was curious if you had thoughts.
And I haven't yet,
Right.
so I would need to still look at it and formulate some ideas. I'm against the sequestration, CO2 sequestration, injection into the ground. I don't think that's a really good procedure. And I got the impression you felt that way too.
Well, in as much as it helps farming with in the form of charcoal, biochar in the ground. If someone wanted to
Yes,
do
but
that
now
specific use, I'm all for it.
they're talking about the liquefied CO2 and injecting it into the ground, and the burying the charcoal is okay. That's fine. Um, but this injecting the liquids, it can escape again. It can end up causing problems for people, and they're being forced to accept it, inject it under their homes. I don't think that's a good idea. And as far as I know, that bill passed.
Well, I'm pretty sure you'll disagree with this, but I've the amount of people talking about climate being in so many years the climate will turn so bad that people will start dying off. The amount of people who have come and gone decade after decade talking about that. I remember what was his name? Kerry? No, Al Gore was his name in 2000. I know there were people before him, and now we have Greta Thunberg. It sort of feels like Boy Who Cried Wolf to me, and because of that, I've sort of tuned it out.
Well, I think you should start looking into it again. You see, they had models showing that this would happen back then. And the question is, well, when are we going to really see it? Um, it's been working in the background the whole time. It's physics. It's really inescapable. And what's happening is we're going to start seeing it now. All right. I understand you're like, well, we don't really see it yet. So it sounds like boy who cried wolf. I understand. But now I think you're going to see it. Um, Southwestern US is going to become unlivable. And maybe next year, they're going to run out of water. It's going to be too hot, too long. If there's a power outage, people in mass numbers are going to die from the heat because if they lose their air conditioning. Um, it might take a little longer, but you're going to start seeing Florida go underwater. There's definitely going to be more and more flooding, and I think you'll see it in your lifetime. The extreme heat, you could see you're seeing it now, but it's going to get even worse next year. It might get so bad next year that you're going to have migration within the U.S. So people in the Southwest are going to be moving up here because they're going to be too hot and they're going to run out of water. I think we're in a good place in Pennsylvania. This Pennsylvania would be good for the rest of our lives, I think. But if it continues going in the direction it's going, one of the things I wrote in an email to you, if we reached an average of 4 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial um, average temperature, we would the entire continental U.S. would become uninhabitable. We would all be moving north. Canada would become the new U.S.
It brings to mind some of the theories about how the climate changed over history over the past like 4,000 years, something like that. With the Bronze Age collapse, the Little Ice Age in Europe. Um, I've I've heard differing theories on that. I've heard theories about one of the factors in the Bronze Age collapse being a cooling of the global temperature, leading to the Mediterranean precipitation from the Mediterranean being affected and causing droughts in Egypt and surrounding areas. I think that's interesting to read about, if nothing else.
Well, one interesting effect of the global warming is that the oceans are warming, and the warming of the Atlantic Ocean is going to disrupt the currents. So this so-called AMOC or AMOC, and I don't remember what it stands for, but it's an ocean current. Um, it's a current that helps to warm northern Europe and cool down um, the areas close to the U.S., to Florida. Um, so we're going to see actually northern Europe get cooler. And I've heard some people call it an ice age. It won't be like covered in ice, I don't think, but it will be several degrees cooler, and it will disrupt agriculture for Europe. They could have a lot of trouble with that.
Hmm.
Well, one of the first things that's going to happen with the climate changes is we're going to have crop failures, and we're going to have you know, drastic reduction in food coming from the sea because all the fish are going to die off. Their food chains are being cut because of the heat. So their normal food isn't going to survive, and then it's going to go all the way up the food chain. Everything's going to die.
Hmm.
I think it's happening now. We're going to the agricultural production and the seafood production are both dropping.
Hmm. Well, there's
So
there's various reasons for agricultural production dropping as well.
I think it's the climate is the largest. Like in Australia, it's becoming too warm for eucalyptus trees. They're all dying off. Well, that's the primary food for the koala bears. They're going to die. The fish, when it gets too warm, you're going to get different kinds of um, algae and bacteria, and they're the kind that are toxic. So you have with these toxic blooms, um, they they grow to too large of a proportion, run out of food, they all die, and then this decaying material from their death is killing off all the life in the ocean. Um, it's not that drastic like immediately today, but it's you can see it more. It's more measurable. I think we'll see it more and more each day. Um, I can't remember where I was going. Oh yes, with the heat, it's going to become unbearable in areas around near the equator first, and so we're going to see migration away from the equator towards the poles. Now, I don't really think this so-called invasion and all that is an insurmountable problem. I think it's something we can take care of. We're going to have real mass migration from climate. We haven't seen it yet. I mean, millions, hundreds of millions uh, moving north. And if it reaches that 4 degrees Celsius, which and that's an average worldwide temperature above pre-industrial, that may not happen in our lifetime, but it will cause everyone in the continental U.S. to move north too. We're going to become the migrants, and U.S. has all the weapons, so I think Canada's going to become the 51st state, and that'll be the new United States.
Well, that'll be interesting.
We'll be moving in with our Canadian neighbors. But that I wouldn't say that's in our lifetime, and I think we will see enough of the problem when we reach maybe only 2 degrees above, and hopefully we can start turning it around. I'm hoping we will come up with new technologies to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and what it takes is a political will. So when we start seeing more and more disasters, then I think we'll see the political will. But just right now, baked in, there's hundreds of millions of people are going to die that we can't stop because there's going to be disruptions in food production. There's going to be unbearable heat. There's going to be extreme weather like hurricanes and floods. Um, it's already a huge number of people, and it's only going to get worse the longer we wait. But yes, I'm hoping, my hope is that we would be able, by the time we reach 2 degrees above um, the industrial average temperature worldwide, that we would start tackling the problem and devoting the resources to it and actually stop it from going any further than 2.5 degrees, I hope. And then it would start going down again. And I do believe that within these time periods of when humans have been on the Earth, which is short time geologically speaking, geologically thinks in terms of millions of years, that it is due to carbon dioxide. During this short time when we have been industrialized, the temperature and carbon dioxide have gone up together dramatically. And the projections are actually quite dire. I don't want to be too much of a doomsayer, but yes, just sit back and watch if you don't believe it, and I hope you will eventually. You're going to see more and more extreme. We've got the hurricane category 5 in June has never happened before. We're going to start having category 6s, and it's going to become normal for these extreme heats in U.S. Southwest, in U.S. South, Texas, Florida. Not only extreme heat, but we have, because the Earth is warmer, there's more water vapor. It rains down again. It increases the precipitation. And unfortunately, that precipitation is not widely distributed like in areas that are drought. It's concentrated in certain areas, and those areas become flooded. So you end up having both droughts and floods. So I'm sorry to be a doomsayer.
That's all right. Well, we're a little over the hour mark now. I'm not sure if you had any
Definitely.
particular time cutoff you were concerned about.
No, I think that's good. I understand people who are still skeptical, and I say, start looking into the weather and the temperature and the CO2 and learning about it, because I think the explanations are becoming more refined now and more understandable, and you're going to start seeing the effects.
Yeah. Well, but before I let you go, you are a Green Party candidate in Pennsylvania. My understanding is that you're still collecting ballot petitions to get your name on the ballot. If someone
Yes.
wants to sign their name and try to get your name on the ballot in Pennsylvania, where should they go?
There is a website, GPOFPA, and it stands for Green Party of Pennsylvania, GPOFPA.org. And you can learn about the Green Party in Pennsylvania. There is a particular page for signing up for petitions, and I could forward that to you in the email. I don't have it
Okay.
offhand. But yes, every little bit helps. I believe we have the minimum number of signatures already, but there's usually in a presidential election year a challenge to try to kick the presidential candidate off. 4 years ago, I was running for attorney general. I got 80,000 votes in Pennsylvania. Uh, I like to say I got more votes than Kanye West got running for president, but um, we were sued. I stayed on the ballot. Howie Hawkins got for president got kicked off the ballot for the Green Party. Um, and yeah, it was arduous. We had to basically fight for every signature. uh,
I
if
believe it.
somebody didn't write their address correctly, it could get kicked off. If they didn't spell their name correctly, it could get kicked off. There are some legitimate challenges. Sometimes you meet a group of college kids and they all say, "Okay, I'll sign," and some of them might not be registered in PA, so they don't count. Um, They might be, coming from out of state to go to school in Pennsylvania. So yeah, those can be stricken. But they make claims, and it's a Democrat who will sue, and they're being funded by Democrats, I'm sure. And they use pricey, you know, high-priced lawyers.
Well,
And
aren't they confident that Joe
we,
Biden can win without Jill on the ballot?
I don't think so. All right. There's been exit polls done last time Joe ran, and it's like the people who voted for the Green Party were not going to vote at all. They were going to stay home. So what the Green Party does is bring more people to the polls. So I'm not necessarily trying to convince Democrats to vote for the Green Party. I'm trying to get more people who don't vote to come and vote for the Green Party. There's actually, even in a presidential year, only about 50% of the eligible voters actually vote. So if all the people who are eligible would come out and vote green, we would win. Even if none of the others switched, the Republicans or the Democrats. There's a lot of people who don't register, and I think we should change that to make it easier to register to vote. And last time I asked someone to register, he said, "Oh, I'm not registered." I'm like, here's a form to register to vote, and he didn't want to. I'm like, why not? He said because they take the jury selection from the voter rolls, and he doesn't want to be picked for jury duty. I don't think we should pick jurors from the voter roll. Take it from driver's license or something. I don't
I
know,
didn't know
something
that's where they
else.
got it. I thought it was, I guess, not driver's license, but I assumed they had some list of residents for each county, and that's where they got it. I wasn't aware it was voters.
That's what I understand. I mean, if I'm wrong, please correct me.
I never looked into it. I was just making an assumption.
Mhm. So yes, they shouldn't be discouraging people from voting. And like we said last time we talked, I think it should be very easy to register. People should be registered at birth. They should be registered when they just show up to vote. Take a picture and a fingerprint. Say, okay, you're registered.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the people challenging should be the ones to go and say, oh, this person's not a citizen, and then prove it.
Well,
Okay.
thank you very much for coming on. It was a good discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, covered a lot of topics.
I'm going to send you a link for signing up for petitioning.
Yes, I can
And
put that in the description when I get it.
and then there's a petition form that can be printed out. Unfortunately, the form is designed by the state of Pennsylvania Department of State, and it's not a user-friendly form. It'll give you a tiny space to write in, and it has to be printed on legal size paper. And I have a home printer, but maybe many people like mine doesn't print on legal size paper. So
Right.
I have to go to Office Depot or something and get them printed. But yes, they can download it, they can sign it, and find the nearest Green Party chapter or mail it in. But yeah, we can try to get people to come out and get the signature so you don't minimize what you have to do. But we don't necessarily have people in every uh, rural area. I think we get the most in Allegheny County. We have a very active chapter here, and we probably get the largest number of the signatures here.
And if I remember right, the deadline is July 27th. Is that right?
We want to, put them all together July 27th, but I think the deadline is August 1st.
Okay.
So they're going to be putting them all together in order to submit, the 27th, 28th, and then we'll try, submitting them successively until they're all submitted after that, and should all be done August 1st, including my own candidate affidavit, which I had notarized and I just handed it in today. But they'll take that also to Harrisburg.
Best of luck with that.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So thanks for having me on.
Yep.
Let me know when you want to talk again.
Yep. Okay. Well, yeah,
We have very divergent views on a lot of things, so we could talk about a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, it was good talking, and have a good day.
Thanks, and just let me know what your next topic is.
Yep. I'll see ya.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.